Hello everybody. Today we are going to be talking about the Bill Clinton presidencies. Now this will be on lesson 60 on your outline pages. In my portion of the video, I'm going to be talking about the election of 1992 as well as the election of 1996. To begin with, I'll start talking about the election of 1992. Now this election, the two Republican and Democratic candidates, so the Republican candidate was the incumbent president, George H.W. Bush, and the Democratic candidate was Bill Clinton. Now, before they got these nominations, there was actually a lot of competition going on beforehand. For George H.W. Bush, this was quite surprising because he was the incumbent president, and it's usually quite easy for them to gain their party's nomination, but not in his case. There was a lot of stiff competition, especially because he originally was saying he wasn't going to allow taxes to increase, but because of stuff going on in the economy, he actually did end up going back on what he said about that, which made a lot of people not too happy with him, but he did still end up winning that nomination. On the Democratic side, Bill Clinton also faced a lot of competition, especially because there was some scandals going around about him early on before he was even elected to the presidency. So that's his side of things. George W. Bush, he was running on a campaign of traditional values, free enterprise, patriotism, and continued military intervention in the Persian Gulf War. Bill Clinton was running on a campaign full of lots of progressive issues like abortion, social welfare, but he appealed to a lot of people because he used phrases such as "I feel your pain," which resonated with a lot of people. But things get a little interesting in the election when a third-party candidate, Ross Perot, starts to run. Now, he starts to appeal to a lot of conservatives who maybe weren't the most happy with Bush at the time. And he actually ends up getting a lot of their votes in the final election. So because of this, there was a split Republican vote, and Bill Clinton won 43% of the popular vote, Bush won 37.4%, and Perot won almost 19% of the popular vote, which is crazy considering he was the third-party candidate. But he didn't end up winning any electoral votes. So Clinton won with 370 electoral votes, and Bush ended up losing with 168 electoral votes. And this ended 12 years of Republican control of the presidency, and that had been since Ronald Reagan. All right, so now we'll be moving on to the election of 1996. In this election, the nominees ended up being Bill Clinton and Bob Dole. Bill Clinton was Democratic and Bob Dole was Republican. But the beginning of this election ended up being a bit weird for the Democratic Party. So Clinton was actually expected to just stay a one-term president, and this was because of some missteps early on in his administration, as well as some acts that he passed that weren't necessarily the most popular among all Americans, such as the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Act, which you'll learn more about a bit later in this video. But he ended up gaining back some of his public support because of the Republican Congress. Now, the Republican Congress at the time was pursuing policies in an uncompromising and confrontational manner, and this was kind of giving the Republican Party a bad image. And it actually, what they were doing, forced two partial government shutdowns, which is kind of crazy, which is very unusual. But Clinton actually won a lot of public support for his more moderate approach to what was going on. So he, gained back some of his popularity. And then we move on to the Republican side of things. Bob Dole ended up winning the Republican nomination, but there was actually a lot of competition on that side. There was a lot of different people trying to win that nomination who had a lot of popularity among the American people, but Bob Dole did end up winning. Perot actually ran again in this election. He ran with the Reform Party, and he actually won 8% of the popular vote, which obviously isn't as much as he received in the last election, but it's still quite a good amount. But in this election, if you didn't already know, Clinton did win. He beat Dole with 49% of the popular vote. And actually between these elections, only 5 states had switched their votes, like who they were voting for. And Arizona was actually one of those, and it was the first time they had voted Democratic since 1948. All right, so those were the elections of 1992 and 1996 in quite a bit of detail. But next you'll be learning a bit more about the Clinton administration specifically and all the different things that he did.
I will now be moving on to the domestic affairs portion of this lesson. The first domestic affair was the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993. This was passed on February 5th, 1993, and it basically allowed workers to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to bond with a newborn, newly adopted, or newly placed child, spouse, or parent, or care for their own serious health condition without fear of losing their jobs. This was significant because employees were able to balance their work and family responsibilities by having the ability to take reasonable unpaid leave for certain family and medical reasons. The second domestic policy or affair was the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. The background of this policy was that President Clinton, during his presidential campaign, made numerous promises to liberal groups, which included homosexuals, feminists, radical environmentalists, and many others. The policy essentially said that openly homosexual people could not serve in the military, and if they wanted to, they must not tell anyone of their sexual orientation, and officers were not allowed to ask other military personnel about their sexual orientation, and discrimination was not allowed. The legacy of this policy was that since 2011, openly homosexual and bisexual people were allowed to serve in the military. The third domestic affair is the ratification of the North American Free Trade Agreement. The passing of this agreement was due to the increased international cooperation and dependence between countries, in this case between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Under this treaty, tariffs and other trade restrictions between the three countries were eliminated. An example of this treaty in effect was when Mexico was suffering an economic crisis, and when they requested American assistance, President Clinton ordered the U.S. Treasury to loan the Mexican government more than $20 billion for support. The final domestic affair was the passing of the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993. The bill stemmed from a budget proposal made by President Clinton in February, seeking a mix of tax increases and spending reductions that could cut the deficit in half by 1997. Basically, the act increased the top federal income tax rate from 31% to 39.6%, increased the corporate income tax rate, raised fuel taxes, and raised various other taxes as well. The bill also included $250 billion in spending cuts over a 5-year period. The legacy of the bill was that it helped the U.S. federal government to experience in 1998 its first budget surplus since the 1960s.
Hello class, welcome to my backyard where it's getting stormy, and so we're going to see how quick I can get through this. We're going to dive into some of the Clinton scandals and some controversies he was involved in during his presidency. We'll get started with Travelgate, which was really the first ethical controversy in the Clinton administration. You can look in your outline and follow along with us. This occurred in 1993 when 7 employees of the White House Travel Office were fired, which was strange because typically executive branch employees would remain in their posts for a lot of terms and a lot of years, no matter what political party was in office or whatever president was there. But even though the president had these ability to terminate any of these employees and fire them without reason, it very rarely occurred. So this gathered a lot of attention. Well, when these employees were fired, the White House stated that these firings happened because financial improprieties, that's a particularly hard word to say, in the travel office were revealed earlier by an FBI investigation. There was messy files and disorganization in this office, and Clinton was rather dissatisfied. So when the Clinton administration began, one of the first things Clinton noticed was the chaos and disorganization of the White House Travel Office. The White House felt that the travel office was rarely investigated by the media due to close relations with the press and communications members and all that stuff. So all this to say, Clinton found the travel office to be lacking and decided to terminate all current employees and reorganize it himself. Critics saw these events differently. They believed that Clinton and friends sought the firings of these people. This font is very hard to read. They sought the firing of these people in the travel office to take the business for themselves. And this strange and wild accusation does not lack any evidence. So we'll dive into some of the evidence there. The former travel office staff had been replaced by Little Rock, Arkansas-based company Worldwide Travel. It can be seen as a coincidence that the company is based in the Clintons' hometown, but it was found that the company had several ties to the Clintons, which of course does not look good for him. Hollywood producer Harvey Thomason, known for a movie called The Last Ride, which is a movie about American musician Hank Williams, if any of you guys know his music, and his business partner tried to get their air charter company to replace the Airline of America as the White House business. The funny part is they didn't own any airplanes at the time, which is kind of silly if you're trying to become the charter airport for, all important American business and you don't own any planes. But Thomason's business partner, Darnell Martins, wanted the White House to award their company a $500,000 contract while simultaneously seeking travel office charter business. So they just kind of asked for more and more, and that confused the press especially, because this company that supposedly has no connections to the Clintons is asking for money and asking to be a huge business. These connections of the Clintons invading the travel office sparked investigations, and this created the name Travelgate. So basically, this kind of kicked off Clinton's bad reputation as a president, despite some of his achievements in the legislature he passed. Earlier, you can see in your outline and presented by my classmates, but a year into his first term, he started to go downhill a little bit, reputation-wise. So now we get into his second term, and you'll see the Clinton and Lewinsky sex scandals occurred. But we'll also cover the Whitewater scandal, which was a smaller, more financial scandal involving both Clintons, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, at a younger age, where they started this business with some friends from college, where they bought a bunch of land and tried to turn it into like ski lodging and stuff. This business turned into a huge failure due to a bad economy, which is pretty similar to the time Mr. Fredericks lost almost $30,000 in the NASDAQ. But anyway, the Clintons pulled out of the business, but their partners continued to work on the sinking ship. They ended up committing a lot of financial crimes like fraud and tax evasion and other stuff, and it got them jail time and fines, but the Clintons kind of had their hands clean until Republicans found out that Clinton had a previous connection to the business, and it was exposed and became the Whitewater scandal, which took a pretty big toll on Clinton's reputation. They took the story public, making the Whitewater scandal mainstream. So the Whitewater Development Corporation, developed by Bill Clinton and some of his friends back when he was governor of Arkansas, turned into a massive failure, which happens with some business ventures. And when the Clintons left, their partners committed a lot of crimes, and I guess in the end, Clinton was responsible somehow in the political scheme. Then we'll get into the last one, which is the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal, which happened during his second term and spanned a few years, and really did a toll on the nation, as we're a country who's known for fair elections and the people choosing who's in charge of the country and upright leadership, which, in the time of Clinton, with all these headlines and national discourse, it's very hard to take our great nation seriously and our leaders seriously. So that's the detriment of the scandal. Now, of course, I'll explain it. In 1995, President Clinton got into a sexual affair with a 22-year-old intern named Monica Lewinsky. She was born in San Francisco and had moved to D.C. as an unpaid intern in the White House. Their sexual relationship lasted until 1997, where, the scandal was starting to pick up, and Lewinsky had made some friends who have advised her through the situation. The scandal led to the impeachment of President Clinton, which was the second to occur in American history and the third total because President Trump was impeached previously. Lewinsky and Clinton met in the Oval Office and had numerous sexual encounters throughout the course of a couple of years. And during this time, she was relocated due to suspicions to the Pentagon, where she met a new friend of hers named Linda Tripp, who advised her to record conversations with Clinton. And then Linda Tripp had a friend named Lucien Goldberg, who encouraged Tripp to record her conversations with Lewinsky. Now, when this whole scandal broke out, the president denied ever having relations with Lewinsky, saying the famous phrase, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." And he looked into the eyes of the American people and lied, which of course a few days later, whenever hard evidence was released, he had to retract his statement and say the opposite, which was that he did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky. The whole thing went to trial, a case more commonly known as Clinton versus Starr, who was a lawyer who previously represented someone who accused Clinton of sexual assault in an earlier time. So Lucien Goldberg received these tapes from Tripp, who had recorded her conversation with Lewinsky about her relationship with President Clinton. And Goldberg shared these with this lawyer who was actively or previously fighting a case on behalf of a woman who claimed President Clinton had assaulted her, which obviously as he became president, we know how it is. She got a large sum of money and ended up being quiet. But in the courtroom during this case, tapes recorded by Lewinsky at the urging of course, Miss Tripp, and a blue dress stained with Clinton's DNA on it was submitted as evidence. Clinton later went on television again, of course, to state that he did in fact have a relationship with Lewinsky, and in the end this damaged the reputation of America's leaders and embarrassed the nation. So to relate this to current events, we see today, or rather in 2016, with President Trump in office, he was a blunt and coarse man who said things without thinking and has quite a large ego, which for some would overshadow the accomplishments in numbers that he had. So President Clinton, during his presidency, did some good things for the economy of America, but it's often overshadowed by opponents and supporters likewise that his actions while in office in terms of scandals and embarrassing the nation had overshadowed his success. But thank you guys for watching this lesson on time period 9. We hope you enjoyed, and yeah.
My fellow Americans, on this day,
with high hopes and brave hearts, in massive numbers, the American people have voted to make a new beginning.
The people of this country are hearing Bill Clinton's message. They're deciding to help the Clinton board ticket change this country and get our country moving forward in the right direction.
What's your name?
My name's Kyle Demers.
How old are you?
8. How does it feel like to be president?
I don't know. I haven't won yet, but I hope it'll feel good. Will you ask somebody to vote for me? Tell them you saw me and I looked all right, okay?
Bill Clinton wants to put people first.
Put people first. It's time to put the American people first. to invest and grow this economy.
People tell him things they don't tell anybody else. This is not unusual. And I think part of it is because they recognize somebody who has had honest struggles in his own life. And so when someone says something to him, he doesn't brush them off. He doesn't look beyond them. He listens to them. He will listen, and he will care, and he will try to help.
You see this sticker I've got on? It says, I voted. I voted Clinton and Gore, and I was the first person in Texas this morning to vote for Bill Clinton at 7 a.m.
This election is about change. Change in our party, change in our leadership, change in our nation.